Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few questions to Minister in response to his ministerial statement. In view of his concluding remarks as to when the PDO will be established, which is towards the end of the year, can I inquire how much funding the office is likely to require? Of course, provided the bill goes through, but I am quite certain the ministry would have done some calculation. The second question is the number of staff the PDO intend to raise to begin operations, and eventually what is the number of staff that will be hired or appointed for the purposes outlined. The third question relates to the exclusions. Minister covered generally three types of legislation: gambling, organized crime, and terrorism. What other legislation will be excluded for consideration, provided in the event a member of the public seeks assistance from the PDO? And finally, can the minister please explain the relationship between cases that will be taken up by the PDO and class? Will there be fundamental differences which would result in a case being handled by one entity as opposed to the other? Thank you.
What was the third question again, please?
The third question, Minister covered the legislation that will be excluded. I think Minister mentioned 9 pieces of legislation will not be under the remit of this department. Minister covered 3, and I'm inquiring what the others are.
The 3 headings covered the 9 legislation. Okay. As to the questions on how much funding the office is likely to require and the number of staff to begin operations, these are matters of detail. We have some idea, but I would prefer to deal with it, if necessary, at the bill stage, because there's some discussions going on with the Minister for Finance. So maybe you can ask him as well. I don't think he will appreciate me going into those details at this point. Of course, I can tell you and then bind him, but it doesn't work that way. No, on a more serious note, this primarily has to be funded out of MINLAW's budget. And we are discussing both on the staffing issues and the monetary issues. Obviously, I'm not making a ministerial statement here without a cabinet clearance on the principles. And we intend to start with, as I said, in a very modest way by the end of this year. That means trying to get the bill drafted, put in place, try to get it put through, have the people employed, all within the next 8 months or so. So it's quite a rush. So I would prefer to defer the questions on numbers, but what the House can be certain about is that at a steady state, with the kind of framework we are thinking of, a fairly robust means test, merits test, we will cover those who need assistance. As to the relationship between PDO and class, again, that's at the margins. I think I have said what we will cover. And we will have to discuss with class. There will be perhaps cases which may not qualify for our means test, but class may feel will be good to cover. And of course, PDO will only assist Singapore citizens. So there are some categories that class may perhaps cover too, but these are things that will need to be discussed in greater detail with the Law Society.
Mr. Murali Pillai.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank the Honourable Minister for his ministerial statement, which is a response to my parliamentary question asking for an update on his proposal to set up the Public Defender's Office. I applaud the government's announcement to set up this Public Defender's Office. This is a shift from the previous position of the government not to set up the Public Defender's Office. And it's a good example of how the government continually looks at policies and makes the necessary changes to suit the circumstances. I have two supplementary questions. One, in relation to the staffing of the Public Defender's Office with legal officers. As this House would note, we had moved amendments to the constitutions to create a legal service commission as well as a judicial service commission. As far as the Public Defender's Office is concerned, I assume, or rather may I ask the Honourable Minister, which commission would be superintending over the officers so that they can be properly developed to be capable and delivering their duties without favour and to the expectations, based on the expectations set on them. The second question is in relation to the exclusions. I listened to the Honourable Minister. He mentioned about, I think, 9 statutes which he proposes to exclude. Does he propose to also exclude private prosecution? Because as the Honourable Minister is aware, there's public prosecution and there's private prosecution. And may I ask, as a matter of concept, the PDO is not meant to be engaged for private prosecution. Thank you.
I think on the two questions, I will give an answer. But first on the comment as to decline PDO, I'll stand corrected. I'm not sure that we expressly declined to have a PDO, but I think in substance, the member is correct in that the government has previously taken the position that criminal legal aid ought not to be funded. But as I described earlier in my ministerial statement, by 2013, we explained that we will do so, and we did so through class. So this is a further and very significant step forward. So that's about 9 years now where we have been funding criminal legal aid. Right? As to the specific questions as to which commission, I think the right position ought to be that the PDO should not be, or the officers within PDO, qua PDO, should not be subject to either commission. Neither the Judicial Service Commission nor the Legal Service Commission. They will be Ministry of Law officers in a department under Ministry of Law and separate from both commissions. I don't, in principle, completely rule out secondments from either commission. Those are matters of detail which need to be looked at. But when they exercise their duties qua PDO officers, they will be assessed primarily by MINLAW. Now, second, private prosecutions. Again, I want to be careful about setting things in stone today, but the thinking is that private prosecution should in principle not be covered by this.
Mr. William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 4 clarifications for the Minister for Law. First is, I'd like his confirmation that the setting up of the PDO in no way affects the current High Court scheme for LASCO, meaning that the scheme for legal representation for capital cases still remains within the province of the Supreme Court, and this scheme in no way changes that. So that's the first question. Second question, he mentioned earlier that the demarcation of work between the PDO and class would be worked out. I wonder whether he could comment on whether certain statutes currently not covered by class, for example, road traffic offences, whether there's been discussion that the PDO office could accept some of these cases which tend to affect people of lower income. I mean, it stretches the strata of society. So there will be a significant section of the public who would benefit from coverage under the Road Traffic Act. Third question, on excluded offences again, he mentioned that there might be certain offences not covered because there is some moral reprehensibility about them. I wonder whether it might also include, for example, drink driving cases. Would he be able to comment on that specifically? And last of all, my question is whether the PDO scheme would also handle appeals. Thank you.
I thank the member for the 4 questions. On the last one, the short answer is yes, it will cover appeals, and both sides can appeal. On the first question on LASCO, I actually didn't touch on LASCO at all. I talked about class. On LASCO, I think one has got to see if a PDO covers fully, then we've got to see whether LASCO is necessary, because in the end, regardless of which pocket, it all comes from government's pocket and ultimately from the taxpayer. So this is something that we need to discuss with the Supreme Court. What makes sense from a public taxpayer's perspective and the perspective of the person to be defended and the institutions involved. There may be merit in keeping LASCO. So these are issues that need to be discussed. On demarcation of work between PDO and class, as I indicated to the leader of the opposition, this is something that needs to be discussed. Our intention is that regulatory offenses should not be covered. Road traffic offenses can fall in different categories. Some may be regulatory, some will be much more than regulatory. If they are serious and they have serious consequences and they deal with substantive issues of moral fault, that is something that could possibly be covered. Drink driving, I'm not quite sure where it fits in, because it seems to come from the third question. I would prefer to hold my comments on drink driving until we have settled on the list of legislation. Thank you, sir.